Hey guys, Ryan here. Tonight we stand knee-deep in squelching mud as the first pale light creeps over thatched roofs, and you probably won't survive this, but let's see how close you get. Imagine dragging yourself out of a straw mattress to the sound of cackling hens and groaning oxen, your feet greeted by a chilled slurry of yesterday's rain and last week's chamber pot. Before we settle in, if this resonates with you, hit like and subscribe only if you're here for more of this vibe. Now, share your location and local time in the comments so we can compare who's hearing roosters first. Gently lower the lights, switch on that soothing fan breeze, and come with me as we unwind into tonight's adventure. You trudge toward the manor's central yard, where ironclad peasant boots leave half-moon prints in a landscape more mud than earth. Mainstream scholars note that by 1300, a typical villager spent at least 2 hours each morning cleaning tools and feeding livestock, chores that begin before sunrise and stretch your limbs into a permanent yawn. In this sleepy hour, you grip a wooden bucket to fetch water from the communal well, mindful that everyone else needs a turn before dawn's first bird call. Imagine waiting in line for water while the noble family sleeps in silk sheets 10 feet above. It's a humble reminder of your place in the social pond. Your fingers slip on the mossy stone rim, and you haul up the rope, wondering whether that slimy algae counts as aquatic seasoning. Historians still argue whether medieval wells were cleaned seasonally or only when they overflowed with debris. Either way, that bucket will taste faintly of iron and yesterday's rain, spiced with a ghost of last summer's hay, and you gulp it down because river water is a far greater gamble. The ground beneath your feet resembles a treacle-thick pudding, and every step generates a muffled squish that echoes through the dawn mist. Fringe sources claim some serfs rubbed animal fat mixed with crushed herbs onto their boots to fend off leeches, part insect repellent, part desperate hygiene. You probably won't survive a single week if you thought modern hiking was rough. 3 light jokes float through your foggy mind, one about the knight who tried pond scum as shampoo, another about the baker who napped in dough for warmth, and a third about a jester wrestling a goose before breakfast. None of them had hot water. By now, your clothes are plastered with mud, straw shards, and a suspicious smudge that might be pig slurry. You lift your tunic hem to avoid a mile-long drag but end up face first in a puddle, an honorary baptism into peasant life. A mainstream fact: peasants changed their linen shifts only a few times a year, relying on sunlight and aromatic herbs to mask odors. Historians still argue whether body odor was considered a sign of prosperity or simply unavoidable. Either way, soap was a luxury, and if it existed, it was scented with animal fat and ashes. Delightful, right? Your chore list awaits: feed the chickens, muck out the pigsty, collect eggs, and repair the fence. Already, you can feel each muscle protesting like a cranky monk at first vespers. And that's before you even touch breakfast. But hey, at least you saved a candle by waking at dawn, right? Actually, most villagers used rushlights made from reed soaked in animal grease, burn time about half an hour, enough to glance at the chore ledger before darkness swallowed the yard again. Humane calorie debates still rage among scholars. Did a peasant's morning meal hit 300 calories or closer to 500? Your stomach rumbles louder than the manor bell as you imagine the pottage bubbling over the hearth. But you're not there yet. You're here, splattered in mud, learning that medieval mornings were less serene sunrise and more get up before the sun or starve. Your day officially begins when the manor steward yells, "To work," and you jog, well, hobble, past ox yokes and half-mended carts. Another mainstream fact: serfs owed 3 days of labor per week to the lord of the manor, plus extra during harvest. That's roughly 16 hours of toil, not counting feasts or festivals when the work halted, unless the lord forgot to declare a rest day. Historians still argue whether those feast days outnumbered labor days in a typical year. As you shoulder your first bale of hay, you catch your breath and realize you've already earned a free sauna, steam rising from compressed straw pressed against your shirt. It's like wearing a medieval wellness spa, minus the cucumber water. If only modern spas promised mud, sweat, and tears, they'd made a killing. By the time the first true sunbeam lands on your shoulder, you're coated in dust, sweat, and that mystery smudge from the pig pen. Somehow, muddy dawn chores sounds poetic in a medieval poem, but living it is more akin to starring in a soggy survival show. Surviving the day seems a triumph, let alone an entire week. And let's be honest, if you can endure the morning mire, the rest might not feel so bad. So as your neighbor offers a weary grin, probably as tired as you realize this daily routine is the backbone of medieval life. It's raw, it's muddy, and it's the reason nobody slept in. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. But for now, take a deep breath, wipe your face on your sleeve, and savor the strange satisfaction of having made it this far. You wipe the mud from your hands on your tunic, then step into the smoky warmth of the village hearthhouse, where the morning's sustenance awaits. A steaming bowl of pottage sits before you, or a thick porridge of beans, barley, and whatever root vegetable survived the winter. It smells of earth and faint smoke, a far cry from anything you'd call aromatic today. You dip a rough wooden spoon in and lift a glistening mouthful to your lips, bracing for the grainy texture that resembles watered-down wallpaper paste. It's hearty, yes, but hardly Michelin star. Yet this humble gruel was a staple diet for most peasants, providing roughly 2/3 of their daily calories according to agricultural records from the 14th century. You swallow with a small cough and reach for the stale bread loaf next to the bowl, dense, crusty enough to double as a doorstop. Breaking off a chunk sends crumbs scattering across the table, where they mingle with stray straw fragments from your clothes. You chew slowly, tasting a slight tang that hints at sourdough fermentation, though by modern standards it's more like letting your bread sit until it develops character. Historians still argue whether medieval calorie counts for peasants averaged closer to 1,500 calories per day or dipped below 1,200 during lean seasons. Either way, you're about to find out if this meal can fuel your next hours of back-breaking labor. A mug of small beer stands at the edge of the table, the amber liquid hazy with yeast sediment. You lift it to your lips, expecting a flat tonic, but instead get a slightly sweet taste, more like fizzy barley water than the bitter ales of taverns frequented by wealthier folk. Medieval brewers intentionally left low alcohol content in daily beer so that even children could drink it without stumbling into haystacks. It's basically 10th century mocktail culture. You notice a fringe account claiming some households spiced their pottage with powdered deer antlers, believing it would grant hunting prowess. It's hard to say whether you'd actually aim straighter with bone dust in your food, but it certainly beats going hungry. Your spoon clinks against the bowl side, reminding you of a blacksmith you once heard about who thought tenderizing meat meant smashing it with his hammer. He ended up with what locals call forge stew. That story gets retold every morning, usually by someone whose own breakfast isn't much better. Between bites, you observe how the pottage's consistency shifts, some bits thicker, some thinner, as if it's alive. Mainstream records show that medieval households prepared large cauldrons of pottage, reheating the same batch for days, adding water and scraps until it reached a nutritionally questionable 5th or 6th iteration. Historians still argue whether that second-day flavor change, known as stew spirit, was deliberate seasoning or just plain desperation to avoid wasting food. You finish the pottage and break off more bread to mop up the remaining broth. A tavern cat slinks by, eyeing your crust. If you look away, it'll swipe it before you can protest, though tales differ on whether villagers secretly welcomed feline theft to keep the rodent population in check. Next comes a wedge of cheese, hard as river pebble and mottled with mold that, paradoxically, signals a well-aged rind. You bite into it and hear a squeak that makes you regret admitting you once thought cheddar came in one flavor only. Cheesemaking was an art honed by monastery kitchens, where monks recorded recipes involving salted curds and repeated layering. Mainstream dairy records note that cheese provided a crucial protein boost, especially during Lent when meat was forbidden. Historians still argue whether that protein content was high enough to sustain heavy labor or simply kept morale from plummeting altogether. You chase the cheese with a swallow of ale, feeling the mild warmth spread through your chest. A folk remedy you overheard suggests rubbing cheese rind on wounds to prevent infection. No surgeon would endorse it today, but perhaps unwittingly they stumbled onto mold's antiseptic properties. Your stomach settles into a comfortable fullness, though you suspect you've consumed fewer nutrients than a modern toddler. You stand, stretch your arms, and feel a slight ache, likely the result of yesterday's threshing work rather than the meal itself. An agricultural decree from 1350 stipulated that workers break for midday meals, consuming fare similar to breakfast and dinner. Historians still argue whether this schedule permitted adequate digestion or simply lengthened villagers' hangry spells. As you rinse your bowl with cold well water, only marginally better than licking the spoon, you overhear someone chuckle about the miller who once ground his own leather boots along with the grain, resulting in an unforgettable loaf that no one claimed. Humor, it seems, was as essential as pottage to get through the day. You step back outside into the brightening morning, the promise of the fields awaiting your toil. In your pocket, you tuck a piece of stale bread, old habits die hard, and head toward the midday sun, fortified by the humble feast that barely feeds and yet sustains. You slip from the barn into the mist-shrouded yard, mud still crusted around your boot soles, and make your way to the village stream. The water glints in the pale light like a strip of quicksilver winding through reeds. Leaning against a smooth boulder, you peel off your tunic and plunge into the chilly flow, grit and grime swirling away downstream. You press a foot onto a sharp flint shard hidden beneath the ripples, and for a moment you're certain you've discovered medieval reflexology, painful but strangely invigorating. Monastic records note that washing in running water was believed to purify both body and soul, though most villagers only dared the plunge on feast days. Historians still argue whether the occasional river bath counted as true hygiene or simply a social ritual. You wade deeper until the current tugs at your calves, teeth chattering as you dunk your head beneath the surface. When you emerge, hair plastered to your skull, you look like a startled eel, but at least you're cleaner than you were 5 minutes ago. Back on shore, you rub 2 damp linen shifts together, creating more suds than you expected, and wonder if your ancestors invented the first sustainable laundry system. Estate inventories from 1400 list only 2 or 3 garments per household. Laundering was less a chore and more a once-in-a-blue-moon extravagance. Whether they scrubbed at Lent and Michaelmas, or whenever they could filch a bar of poor-quality soap, remains a matter of scholarly debate. You crouch beneath an overhanging branch to wring out your shirt, and a single drop of water arcs into your palm like an impromptu salute. You carry a small pouch of crushed willow bark and wildflower petals, medieval multitasking at its finest, tucked into your belt. Mixing a pinch of paste with animal fat from last night's kitchen scraps, you fashion a makeshift sunblock. Brushing it on your cheeks feels akin to smearing ledger ink across your face, a fiscal fashion statement rather than a beauty routine. Some apothecaries claimed crocodile fat boosted protection, others rolled their eyes and stuck to animal grease and rosemary. Historians still argue whether crocodile-based sunscreen ever made the journey north or remained a tall tale from southern ports. As you rise to leave, a dragonfly buzzes past, its wings shimmering like stained glass windows. You track its flight with the greasy sheen on your fingertips, half expecting it to perch on your cheek as if you'd commissioned it for your grand unveiling. Instead, it darts away, leaving you staring at your reflection in a puddle, face streaked with paste. It resembles a tax farmer's ledger more than a skincare endorsement. And yet, the cool draft through your soaked shift feels momentarily luxurious, a reminder that even the roughest routines held moments of relief. Heading back to the cottage, you pass neighbors pinning lavender and rosemary sachets above doorways. The sweet scent drifts over you, a fleeting comfort that eclipses the lingering river musk. A 1420 herbal guide praises these sprigs as mood lifters and pest repellents, though no one can agree if they truly banished insects or merely boosted morale. You slip a sachet into your hand, inhale deeply, and feel, if only briefly, as though you've traded barnyard odors for an English garden in bloom. Inside, you rummage through a rough-hewn chest for your second linen shift. It's damp from airing overnight, but its pale grey hue feels positively pristine compared to your current attire. Sliding into it, you notice how the fabric clings just right, reminding you that a fresh shirt was once a luxury reserved for market days or weddings, if the Lord decreed. Chronicles hint that some peasants owned only a single shift and wore it until it frayed beyond use. Historians still debate how many garments the average villager truly possessed. With your 2 shirts, you're practically aristocratic by comparison. You tie a leather belt around your waist and examine your fingernails. Layers of mud cling beneath each tip like stubborn barnacles. Without clippers, you bite at them, a habit no modern manicurist would recommend but undeniably practical when the nearest tool is a sharpened stick. It's a gritty reminder that medieval self-care didn't involve salon appointments. Instead, it was about making do with what you had, your teeth, a handful of herbs, and a willing imagination. Stepping outside again, you feel the new linen shift settle against your skin, the breeze teasing the hem. The sun has climbed higher, and the courtyard buzzes with activity, a cooper tapping hoops onto barrels, a brewer stirring vats with a paddle the size of a canoe oar, and children darting through legs like stray sheep. You pause to survey the scene, feeling cleaner, lighter, almost pampered by the contrast to yesterday's grime. Yet you know the clean sensation will not last, it's merely a respite before the day's chores claim you once more. Before moving on, you lean against the barn door and catch sight of yourself in the polished bronze kettle dangling nearby. The mirror-like surface shows a damp, ruddy complexion framed by sticky hair and streaks of herbal paste. You let out a soft chuckle, recalling a later tale of a noblewoman who bathed only in perfumed gloves rather than water, an aristocratic workaround that historians still argue served fashion more than function. At least your river ritual guarantees you won't need gloves to smell of lavender. With a final stretch, you brush a stray twig from your sleeve and set off towards the fields, each step releasing a soft squeak as your boots leave damp imprints. You carry the memory of icy water, fragrant sachets, and greasy paste as proof that medieval people chased comfort in the oddest ways, and sometimes, that was the closest they got to self-care. You slip from the barn into the mist-shrouded yard, mud still crusted around your boot soles, and make your way to the village stream. The water glints in the pale light like a strip of quicksilver winding through reeds. Leaning against a smooth boulder, you peel off your tunic and plunge into the chilly flow, grit and grime swirling away downstream. You press a foot onto a sharp flint shard hidden beneath the ripples, and for a moment you're certain you've discovered medieval reflexology, painful but strangely invigorating. Monastic records note that washing in running water was believed to purify both body and soul, though most villagers only dared the plunge on feast days. Historians still argue whether the occasional river bath counted as true hygiene or simply a social ritual. You wade deeper until the current tugs at your calves, teeth chattering as you dunk your head beneath the surface. When you emerge, hair plastered to your skull, you look like a startled eel, but at least you're cleaner than you were 5 minutes ago. Back on shore, you rub 2 damp linen shifts together, creating more suds than you expected, and wonder if your ancestors invented the first sustainable laundry system. Estate inventories from 1400 list only 2 or 3 garments per household. Laundering was less a chore and more a once-in-a-blue-moon extravagance. Whether they scrubbed at Lent and Michaelmas, or whenever they could filch a bar of poor-quality soap, remains a matter of scholarly debate. You crouch beneath an overhanging branch to wring out your shirt, and a single drop of water arcs into your palm like an impromptu salute. You carry a small pouch of crushed willow bark and wildflower petals, medieval multitasking at its finest, tucked into your belt. Mixing a pinch of paste with animal fat from last night's kitchen scraps, you fashion a makeshift sunblock. Brushing it on your cheeks feels akin to smearing ledger ink across your face, a fiscal fashion statement rather than a beauty routine. Some apothecaries claimed crocodile fat boosted protection, others rolled their eyes and stuck to animal grease and rosemary. Historians still argue whether crocodile-based sunscreen ever made the journey north or remained a tall tale from southern ports. As you rise to leave, a dragonfly buzzes past, its wings shimmering like stained glass windows. You track its flight with the greasy sheen on your fingertips, half expecting it to perch on your cheek as if you'd commissioned it for your grand unveiling. Instead, it darts away, leaving you staring at your reflection in a puddle, face streaked with paste. It resembles a tax farmer's ledger more than a skincare endorsement. And yet, the cool draft through your soaked shift feels momentarily luxurious, a reminder that even the roughest routines held moments of relief. Heading back to the cottage, you pass neighbors pinning lavender and rosemary sachets above doorways. The sweet scent drifts over you, a fleeting comfort that eclipses the lingering river musk. A 1420 herbal guide praises these sprigs as mood lifters and pest repellents, though no one can agree if they truly banished insects or merely boosted morale. You slip a sachet into your hand, inhale deeply, and feel, if only briefly, as though you've traded barnyard odors for an English garden in bloom. Inside, you rummage through a rough-hewn chest for your second linen shift. It's damp from airing overnight, but its pale grey hue feels positively pristine compared to your current attire. Sliding into it, you notice how the fabric clings just right, reminding you that a fresh shirt was once a luxury reserved for market days or weddings, if the Lord decreed. Chronicles hint that some peasants owned only a single shift and wore it until it frayed beyond use. Historians still debate how many garments the average villager truly possessed. With your 2 shirts, you're practically aristocratic by comparison. You tie a leather belt around your waist and examine your fingernails. Layers of mud cling beneath each tip like stubborn barnacles. Without clippers, you bite at them, a habit no modern manicurist would recommend but undeniably practical when the nearest tool is a sharpened stick. It's a gritty reminder that medieval self-care didn't involve salon appointments. Instead, it was about making do with what you had: your teeth, a handful of herbs, and a willing imagination. Stepping outside again, you feel the new linen shift settle against your skin, the breeze teasing the hem. The sun has climbed higher, and the courtyard buzzes with activity, a cooper tapping hoops onto barrels, a brewer stirring vats with a paddle the size of a canoe oar, and children darting through legs like stray sheep. You pause to survey the scene, feeling cleaner, lighter, almost pampered by the contrast to yesterday's grime. Yet you know the clean sensation will not last, it's merely a respite before the day's chores claim you once more. Before moving on, you lean against the barn door and catch sight of yourself in the polished bronze kettle dangling nearby. The mirror-like surface shows a damp, ruddy complexion framed by sticky hair and streaks of herbal paste. You let out a soft chuckle, recalling a later tale of a noblewoman who bathed only in perfumed gloves rather than water, an aristocratic workaround that historians still argue served fashion more than function. At least your river ritual guarantees you won't need gloves to smell of lavender. With a final stretch, you brush a stray twig from your sleeve and set off towards the fields, each step releasing a soft squeak as your boots leave damp imprints. You carry the memory of icy water, fragrant sachets, and greasy paste as proof that medieval people chased comfort in the oddest ways, and sometimes, that was the closest they got to self-care. You emerge from the flickering torchlight of the manor's great hall and step into the cavernous entrance chamber, where tapestries of mythic hunts drape the walls like silent witnesses. Tonight, however, you're not a mud-splattered laborer but an invited guest at a noble's banquet, an odd role reversal that you probably won't survive gracefully. As you tug your slightly cleaner tunic straight and suppress the urge to wipe your greasy hands on a corner of finery, you recall that castle etiquette demanded precise bows and measured steps. A single miscourtesy could brand you as a fool, or worse, incur a lord's icy glare. Historians still argue whether these rituals evolved as sincere reverence or simply elaborate power plays. Across the marble floor, courtiers glide in velvet and brocade, goblets in hand, exchanging whispered gossip like delicate arrows. You're handed a silver spoon, an unfamiliar weight that feels as exotic as a songbird's feather. Mainstream inventories from the 14th century show that only the wealthiest households possessed more than a handful of metal utensils. Most commoners made do with wooden spoons and chipped bowls. As you trace the spoon's ornate handle with your finger, you marvel that someone once swept it in scrapings of peacock fat to restore its shine. Your host introduces a troupe of minstrels performing along a raised dais draped in scarlet silk. The fiddler's bow scrapes a mournful tune, while a lute player's fingers dance over strings like fireflies at dusk. At least one fringe account claims these musicians were sometimes paid in leftover scraps, cold meat and hard cheese, forcing them to sleep curled beneath the dais when the corridors lay empty. Historians still debate whether minstrels truly slumbered in castle passages or preferred cramped quarters in nearby villages. As the first courses arrive, you're presented with an oversized trenchers, stale bread carved into thick slabs and soaked in broth, topped with diced venison and minced herbs. The aroma is rich enough to stir your appetite, though you hesitate at the sight of jelly made from boiled swan. Mainstream banquet records list swan as a delicacy reserved for high feasts. Catching one required a royal license, so its appearance here feels almost scandalous. You nibble the trencher, startled by a burst of savory juice, and imagine explaining this choice to your village neighbors, tonight's bread bowl courtesy of royal bird. Between courses, courtiers perform the stately bow and a turner dance, gliding in pairs around a central hearth. You attempt a respectful nod, only to overbalance and nearly topple into a suit of armor displayed nearby. Laughter bubbles from onlookers, polite but unmistakable. You pray that good humor outweighs your clumsiness. After all, spilled wine on silk gowns can prompt duels. Fringe etiquette guides whisper that some hosts deliberately staged minor embarrassments to keep guests humble. Historians still argue if such tricks were widespread or confined to mischievous lords. The main course arrives, a whole roast pig, crackling with glazed skin dark as chestnut bark and stuffed with apples and chestnuts. You carve off a slice of tender meat, juices trickling down your chin, and savor the contrast to yesterday's pottage. A mainstream dietary ledger notes that feasting nobles consumed up to 5 pounds of meat per sitting, with portions often redistributed to attendants once the lords had their fill. You slip a morsel to the minstrel nearest you, earning a grateful nod and the faintest hint of melody, a private encore. At the banquet's halfway point, the lights dim, and torchbearers ignite scented tallow candles that scent the air with lavender and beeswax. You wipe a smear of grease from your cheek, hoping no one mistakes you for a kitchen hand. The court jester emerges then, cartwheeling across the dais in motley, juggling golden apples and reciting bawdy limericks. Even nobles lean forward, smirking at his irreverent punchlines that toe the line of acceptable mockery. Mainstream chronicles record that jesters held a unique license to lampoon royalty, their humor a safety valve for tensions the court dare not voice openly. Historians still debate whether this freedom was genuine or illusionary under a monarch's watchful eye. Between the roast and the final sweet course, a silver platter arrives weighed down by exotic fruits, pomegranates imported from Andalusia, figs from Damascus, and a curious melon variety unidentified in local markets. You pop a fig into your mouth, the sweetness bursting beneath your teeth like summer itself. Fringe gastronomic notes suggest that some cooks paired these fruits with pungent sauces made of fermented fish, a taste combination that reportedly cleared sinuses in record time. You pass on the fish condiment, preferring your palate unviolated by brine. The final course, a delicate custard baked in small pots, arrives amid soft harp music. You tiptoe to retrieve one, mindful of crowds, and spoon the creamy treat slowly, as though savoring every second of this rare luxury. Mainstream recipe books list eggs and almond milk as principal ingredients, flavors so tender they dissolve on the tongue. Historians still argue whether sugar was added sparingly for effect or liberally for pure decadence. Regardless, each bite feels like a warm sigh in your mouth. As the banquet winds down, guests rise to depart, adjusting cloaks and smoothing wrinkles out of velvets. You offer a cautious bow at the dais's edge, wondering if you've earned at least passing respect among these lords and ladies. Your host smiles, perhaps amused by your earnest effort, before inviting you to retire to the adjoining solo with warm spiced wine. You ascend the narrow staircase, chest lighter than it's felt in days, carrying with you the memory of torchlight dancing on tapestries, the echo of lute strings, and a fleeting sense that medieval castles were places of both grandeur and subtle peril. Stepping through the sola's heavy oak door, you settle into a cushioned bench by a latticed window. Outside, moonlight washes the courtyard in silver, and the distant hoot of an owl reminds you this night is far from ordinary. You dip the rim of your goblet into the glowing embers of the last candle and take a sip, letting the warmth seep through your bones before you head back to your straw mattress. Medieval court life, you realize, is a delicate balance of ceremony, spectacle, and whispered dangers, an immersive theater where every gesture can shift your standing in an instant. You awaken the next morning with a dull ache behind your eyes and a raspy tickle in your throat, an unwelcome souvenir from last night's spiced wine. Rolling out of your straw mattress, you pinch a sprig of lavender from the windowsill and crush it between your fingers, inhaling its calming scent. Monastic infirmaries often grew lavender to treat insomnia, yet most villagers relied on tea made from chamomile or even just warm ale to lull themselves to sleep. Historians still argue whether herbal remedies or the promise of another muddy dawn proved more effective for a good night's rest. A cough interrupts your reverie, and you take a draught of herbal decoction offered by the village healer. The brew is a murky blend of willow bark, rue leaves, and honey, bitter enough to make you wince, but reputed to break fevers. Mainstream apothecary manuals from the 15th century list willow bark as a precursor to modern aspirin, praised for its pain-relieving properties. Fringe healers, however, insisted that adding powdered dragon scale bone amplified its potency, an ingredient no official record ever corroborates. Whether the dragon scale claim stemmed from medieval marketing or genuine belief, scholars still debate its origin. You gather your courage and step into the healer's hut, where dried herbs hang from rafters like forgotten banners. The healer, an elderly woman whose wrist rattles with bone bead bracelets, examines your pulse at the wrist, muttering something about wind imbalance. She dips a feather into a bowl of thistle oil and paints it along your collarbone, a chilling touch that makes you shiver. A mainstream observation notes that medieval practitioners believed the pulse could reveal humoral imbalances, but critics question the accuracy of such diagnostics. Historians still argue whether medieval pulse reading ever rivaled modern practices or was more theatrical than empirical. Your eyes water from the thistle oil sting, and you open the door to catch a gust of fresh air. You quip to yourself that medieval facial masks came with their own built-in cryotherapy. Outside, you spot the local barber surgeon sharpening his leech tongs by the smithy's forge. "Need a bloodletting today?" he calls, wagging a crooked grin. You decline, recalling that routine bloodletting often weakened patients more than it healed them. Mainstream medical texts warned against excessive bleeding, though practitioners continued the practice religiously. Fringe anecdotes suggest some surgeons dipped leeches in spiced wine first, believing tipsier leeches drained more efficiently. Whether intoxicated leeches ever existed or simply served as a cautionary tale, historians still debate. Deciding to avoid the barber's blades, you favor a poultice instead. You kneel by your herb collection, rosemary, comfrey, and plantain, smashing leaves into a thick paste with a mortar and pestle. The mixture smells green and pungent, almost edible, but intended as a salve for muscle aches. You press it onto your temples, sighing at the cool relief. Mainstream herbal compendia record that comfrey was known as a knit bone for its supposed ability to mend fractures. Today, we know it contains compounds that can irritate the liver if ingested, yet topical use was commonplace. Historians still argue whether the benefits outweighed the risks in daily medieval life. A distant clatter signals the blacksmith's apprentice dropping a hammer, and you nearly forget your ailment as you laugh softly, because laughter, after all, was considered medicinal too. Medieval physicians wrote treatises on the importance of mirth. Humor, they said, balanced the humors far better than any bitter tonic. You can't help but wonder if more laughter and fewer leeches would have improved public health back then. Your stomach rumbles, reminding you that medicine sometimes doubled as dinner. You head back to the hearth house for another bowl of pottage, this time with added nettle broth, rumored to cleanse blood. You stir the green-tinged gruel, grimacing at its sharp tang. Mainstream dietary guides occasionally recommended nettles for their high iron content, but most peasants avoided them unless desperate. Fringe sources claim that nettle soup would cause temporary hair growth, an early form of follicle therapy. You're skeptical, but willing to give it a taste if it promises even a whisker of health. Between spoonfuls, you study a clay jar of honey-infused ointment on the table. The healer's signature product, meant for coughs and cracked skin, sits beside a faded scroll listing ingredients: beeswax, rosemary oil, and something called unicorn horn shavings. You stifle a laugh imagining alchemists grinding mythical bones into mundane balms. Mainstream inventories never recorded unicorn horn, though powdered rhinoceros horn featured in Eastern recipes. Scholars still debate whether unicorn lore fueled actual trade in alleged horn powders or merely inspired fantastical apothecaries. Having swallowed your medicinal meal, you rinse your bowl and consider offering a token thanks to the healer. Outside her hut, you pause by a fresh bloom of calendula, whose bright petals gleam in the sun. Pulling off a few petals, you chew them into your tea, hoping the mild bitterness eases your lingering cough. Victorian herbalists lauded calendula for wound healing, yet medieval mentions were sparse. Some argue it gained popularity only in later centuries. Historians still argue its true medieval prevalence. As you wander back toward the fields, herbs tucked into your belt and fewer aches lingering, you reflect on medieval medicine's curious blend of earnest experimentation and imaginative lore. Whether dragon scales enhanced your remedy or it was merely willow bark doing the work, you feel a cautious optimism. The day's labor may test your body, but at least you fortified your spirit and your sinuses with more than just sweat and pottage. You steel yourself as you approach the pillory standing just outside the market square, its weathered oak beams creaking in the midday sun. Imagine the humiliation of having your wrists and neck locked into those unforgiving holes, your head bobbing like a startled duck for all the town to see. Mainstream records describe how pillories served as both punishment and public spectacle, intended to shame petty thieves into reform. You slip a hand to your wrist, picturing the rough edges that would chafe your skin, and wonder if the scent of sweat and dust would feel any worse than the persistent stare of passers-by. A sudden breeze stirs the scraps of parchment plastered on nearby walls, advertising the latest fines for drunken brawls and unpaid tithes. You squint at a notice declaring that kissing without a license could cost you half a day's wage. Historians still argue whether such odd laws truly curbed misbehavior or merely filled coffers with petty fees. Still, the idea of a love tax strikes you as both absurd and strangely practical. No wonder young lovers tried to snatch a quick peck behind the alehouse when tax collectors were looking the other way. As you step closer, a guard hefts a ducking stool, its rungs splintering, and you shudder at the thought of being plunged headfirst into cold canal water. Fringe gossip insists that some townsmen coated the stool seat with honey to lure unsuspecting victims into even stickier predicaments. You can almost taste the panic of a hapless bather surfaced with feathers stuck to every inch of clothing. It's easy to see why waterlogged offenders might wish for a pickpocket's net rather than a soaking. You shift your weight, recalling that trial by ordeal once let the accused choose to plunge a red-hot iron into boiling oil or carry a burning brand 3 paces while clutching a metal ball. If their wounds healed cleanly within 3 days, divine judgment declared them innocent. Today, no court of law would tolerate such a test, yet medieval belief in heavenly intervention ran deep. Historians still debate whether trial by ordeal ever produced fewer wrongful convictions than today's more measured methods, though it certainly lacked humane safeguards. Passing a group of children gathered near the stocks, you overhear them giggling as a merchant's apprentice emerges, arms locked in wooden restraints while townsfolk pelt him with rotten turnips. His face is streaked with juice and pulp, and he stumbles forward, sputtering. A local baker opens his flour sack and taps the boy on the shoulder, sending a cloud of white powder into the air like a snowstorm. The apprentice blinks through the powder, giving the children a spectacle that would make any jester envious. You imagine the apprentice's relief when the church bell tolls the hour, signaling the end of his sentence and the removal of the stocks. Records note that the duration in the stocks ranged from a few hours to an entire market day, depending on the crime's severity. Historians still argue whether this public humiliation effectively deterred repeat offenses or merely bred resentment. A cart rattles by, carrying a bound goat destined for a tense trial by witchcraft. Fringe pamphlets insist that stubborn kids labeled their ailing goats bewitched simply to shift blame from their own sloppy feeding habits. Town criers proclaimed that an accused devil's familiar would survive water tests, while a cursed creature would drown like a stone. Whether goats ever judged human misfortune or just met a damp end, local gossip spread faster than wildfire. You continue past the whipping post, its iron rings gleaming underwater in the trough below, a makeshift cattle dip that doubled as a chastisement station. Offenders stripped to the waist and bent over the trough, each lash intended to correct moral and financial delinquents alike. Mainstream legal code stipulated the number of strokes, carefully recorded in ledger books to ensure consistency. Historians still debate whether these public scourgings reformed souls or simply scarred bodies and reputations. A parade of guards marches into view, dragging behind them a merchant accused of selling tainted ale. The man's shoulders are slumped under heavy stocks, and you glimpse the fine cord binding his wrists together. The guard captain announces the verdict and the penalty, a hefty fine plus an hour in the pillory. Rumor holds that the merchant's neighbor paid him a secret coin to suffer the sentence on his behalf, a bizarre act of charity or coded vengeance, depending on whom you ask. You shake your head at the absurdity but feel a twinge of sympathy. Though medieval penalties were severe by today's standards, they reflected a justice system that prized public order over individual privacy. The next time you grumble about a parking ticket, remember that your worst punishment is a digital alert, no rotten vegetables necessary. You step away from the pillory, feeling the quiet relief of walking freely, and notice a few coins tucked into the wooden beams, a tradition, perhaps, of pitying passers-by. You drop a small penny into the slot before the guards arrive, a gesture of solidarity rather than penance. Beyond the market square, life hums on, children chase a hoop along the cobbles, vendors hawk cheese and salt fish, and a minstrel strums a cheerful tune. The spectacle of punishment fades into the bustle, a reminder that medieval justice was as much theatre as it was law. And while you'd never volunteer for a spell in the ducking stool or stocks, you've gained a newfound appreciation for today's gentle court summons. You shoulder your leather satchel and step onto the rutted path that leads from the manor toward the next village, a ribbon of mud and stones that disappears into a distant haze of trees. Each footfall sloshes through puddles deeper than your ankles, and you imagine these same roads once carried merchants, pilgrims, and armies, all negotiating nature's fingerprint across the land. Mainstream itineraries from the 12th century note that travelers averaged only 15 to 20 miles per day on such terrain, thanks to mud-clogged wheels and wary pack animals. Historians still argue how accurate those daily distances truly were, given the whims of weather and bandit raids. Your first companion is a donkey named Bramble, his coat matted with dust and straw. You halter him to a low-hanging branch and scratch behind his ears, earning a grunt of approval. Fringe tales claim some donkey caravans carried secret loads of silk beneath straw bundles, though no customs record ever confirms such smuggling. Whether Bramble once ferried fine Chinese textiles or merely half-rotted turnips remains a mystery for the ages. Mounting your own wheeled cart, its wheels carved from a single elm trunk and reinforced with iron hoops, you test the axle's sway. The wood creaks in protest as you push off, negotiating a washboard of deep grooves. Each groove jolts your spine like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, yet you grin at the thought that modern chiropractors would surely find work if medieval road builders had their way. A sudden bump sends a loose stone flying into your satchel, where it clinks against your wooden writing tablet, a reminder that even travel's smallest hiccups leave audible marks. As you pass a cluster of roadside inns, simple huts with thatched roofs and a sign of crossed tankards, you consider stopping. An innkeeper might offer porridge and a straw pallet for a penny or two, but the inn's fame for lice-infested bedding gives you pause. Mainstream lodging guides warn travelers to air out straw sacks by a bonfire before sleeping, yet few heeded the advice. Historians still debate whether the so-called louse bonfires actually reduced infestations or simply spread smoldering ash along the roads. You choose to press on, keeping pace with Bramble as he ambles beside the cart. The canopy above opens to rolling hills dotted with grazing sheep, their white fleeces spotted like clouds stranded low on the earth. A shepherd leaning on a long staff greets you, his cloak a patchwork of patches that testify to years of mending. You nod, and he offers you a handful of dried figs, luxury fruit carried from distant lands. You pop one into your mouth, its sweetness a welcome contrast to the dusty air. Fringe merchants whispered that some shepherd salted figs as a prank, believing the tang would sharpen travelers' senses against fatigue. You're grateful your offering tastes authentic. The road narrows and climbs toward a low stone bridge arching over a murky stream. Moss carpets the stones, and water trickles through cracks as if the bridge itself longs to return to riverbed. Your cart's wheels grind against slick rock, but Bramble pauses mid-arc, ear flicking at a distant roar. Through the trees, you glimpse a tumbling waterfall, a hidden gem known to only a few locals. Mainstream travelers' logs rarely mention such sights, focusing more on milestones than scenery. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims appreciated nature's beauty or viewed the world solely as a network of waypoints. Securing Bramble to a post, you step onto the bridge and lean against its cool parapet. The waterfall's mist carries droplets that settle on your cheeks like tiny kisses. You close your eyes and inhale, sensing centuries of travelers tracing these stones. The world beyond the bridge feels narrower now, less a bustling trade corridor and more a private sanctuary. Fringe lore suggests a hermit once lived under this bridge, offering travelers cryptic blessings for a loaf of bread. Whether he was a saint in disguise or simply mad remains a matter of speculation. After a brief rest, you remount your cart and guide Bramble back across the bridge. The sun has shifted, elongating your shadow and bathing the path in golden light. You press a hand to your chest, feeling the steady thump of your heart, and marvel that even a simple crossing can feel like an adventure. Hypertension would never have existed in these days, but you suspect your blood pressure climbed a notch with each muddy hill. By mid-afternoon, the path broadens into a muddy plain where travelers converge. A motley crew of peddlers displays woven baskets, dyed cloth, and carved wooden trinkets. You pause to inspect a hand-woven belt dyed with woad, its deep indigo almost unnatural. The peddler claims the color lasts a lifetime, yet no shampoo can remove its stain. Mainstream trade records confirm woad's popularity in northern regions, though historians still debate whether it rivaled imported indigo in quality. You barter with the peddler for a length of belt in exchange for a bowl of your spare pottage, an odd trade that leaves him bemused and you slightly hungrier. As you tuck the belt into your satchel, you catch the aroma of fresh bread baking at a nearby stall. Your stomach rumbles, and you purchase a warm loaf, praising the baker for achieving a crust so crisp it rings like a tiny bell when tapped. The baker smiles and points toward the next hill where a camp of pilgrims is rumored to host free soup for weary travelers. You promise to investigate, wiping your hands on the new indigo belt to test its color fastness. Full again, you resume your journey, each mile surrendering to new surprises, fields of flax swaying like a green sea, distant church spires peeking above the horizon, and curious mile markers carved with saintly symbols. You pause to read one, St. Giles, watch over travelers, it proclaims. You touch the carving reverently, as if seeking protection against invisible highwaymen. Fringe whispers claim some markers hid secret compartments for smuggling letters. Historians still argue how common such covert caches were in medieval networks. As dusk approaches, you crest the last hill and spot the lights of your destination village twinkling like fireflies. The air carries the promise of warm ale and a bed that doesn't squeak. Your shoulders relax for the first time since dawn, and you pat Bramble on the flank. Together, you've conquered roads that test every cartwheel and human muscle. You guide the cart downhill toward home, grateful for each rocky turn and ancient stone that taught you how truly wild and strangely wondrous medieval travel could be. You leave your creaking cart at the village edge and step beneath the flickering glow of lanterns hung from crooked signposts, feeling as though you've crossed into another realm. Crickets chirp in chorus, and the silhouette of oak trees beyond suggests shadows might come alive to greet you. Along the path, rusted iron brackets hold tallow candles, their drips forming stalactite-like crystals on the wood. Mainstream folklore collections record that such lights were thought to guide wandering souls. Some nights, locals swore they glimpsed will-o-wisps dancing just beyond sight. Historians still debate whether these flickers were marsh gases or simple figments born of tired eyes. As you pass under an ancient oak, its gnarled branches twisting toward the sky, you recall whispers of an old woodcutter's tale. He claimed to have seen a timber giant stride among his logs before vanishing in a thunder of leaves. Fringe storytellers insist these forest spirits protected sylvan realms from trespassers, while skeptical chroniclers dismissed them as fanciful warnings to keep children from wandering. Whether giants ever stomped these woods or remained the products of campfire exaggeration, the story endures in every echo of wind through the leaves. Ahead, you spot a stone circle half hidden in brambles, its pillars smeared with moss and carved in symbols that resemble ancient ciphers. Local legend holds that these stones once marked a portal to the otherworld, where luminous beings offered gifts of insight. Modern archaeologists suggest they were merely boundary markers or druidic altars, but the nightly glow some wanderers reported, an ethereal bluish light hovering at moonrise, defies easy explanation. Historians still argue whether such accounts emerged from optical illusions or deeper, unrecorded rituals. You step closer, running your hand along a weathered pillar etched with spirals that feel impossibly smooth beneath your fingertips. A faint humming resonates from the stone, or perhaps it's just the murmur of your own pulse. Fringe sagas tell of lovers who declared oaths before the circle, believing the stones would bind destinies. Couples abandoned offerings of ribbon and wildflowers at the base, hoping for blessings in return. Whether these rituals held any power beyond communal affirmation, they spoke to a human yearning for connection in an unpredictable world. Slipping away from the circle, you follow a narrower track that leads you to a shallow pond bordered by reeds. At twilight, the water's surface mirrors the heavens so perfectly that it seems a gateway to stars rather than a mere reflection. Mainstream mythologies mention water nymphs luring unsuspecting travelers into their depths with haunting songs. Villagers often left small tokens, shells, strands of hair, at the pond's edge to appease these spirits. Historians still debate if such offerings were common practice or enacted by only a few devout believers. A sudden rustle among the reeds catches your attention. You imagine a naiad rising, curls of hair dripping with moonlight, eyes alight with otherworldly intelligence. Instead, a heron stretches its wings and flaps away with a lazy grace, disturbed by your presence. You exhale, half relieved, half disappointed. Myths rarely align perfectly with reality, yet they shade everyday moments with wonder. Continuing on, you arrive at a low stone bridge dripping with moss, its arch reflected in the pond's glassy depths. Beneath it, the water moves in gentle eddies, and you half expect the surface to ripple with an unseen hand. Fringe lore claims that crossing such a bridge at midnight could grant glimpses of future events carried in the currents. Skeptical villagers scoffed at these notions, but some admitted to pausing mid-step, hearts pounding, awaiting visions that never came. Historians still argue whether these tales influence real behavior or stayed confined to oral tradition. You pause atop the bridge, leaning against the cool stone and peering into the water. Your reflection wavers, as if inviting you to abandon caution and venture closer to the edge. A firefly drifts past your ear, its pale glow like a distant lantern. You smile, noting that while you may not see giants or nymphs tonight, each whisper of wind and flicker of light carries echoes of stories told and retold across generations. With one last look at the mossy circle and the lantern-lit path beyond, you turn back toward home, weaving through shadows that feel more alive than they did by daylight. Folklore's gentle hum remains in your veins, a reminder that the medieval mind embraced mystery and marvel in every corner of the world. Even if rational explanations ultimately prevailed, the nighttime landscape thrummed with possibility, and that, you realize, made every journey a kind of enchantment. Night falls like a velvet cloak over the manor's stone walls, and you feel the day's labor unravel in the fading light. Torches gutter as guards make their rounds along the battlements, their footsteps echoing on flagstones slick with evening dew. You join the night watch, a solemn procession of stern faces and clanking armor, each sentinel gripping a pike against shadows that might conceal more than thieving foxes. Mainstream chronologies record that medieval watches rotated every 2 hours, ensuring someone stayed awake to guard granaries and livestock. Historians still argue whether these schedules truly deterred brigands or simply fatigued the guards into lapses. You trudge along the ramparts, rain patterns ghosted on mossy stones, recalling the roar of that hidden waterfall from your travels, now hushed to a distant whisper beneath the moon's pale glare. Your breath clouds in the chill air as you peer into the valley, lantern light dancing on distant cottages like watchful eyes. A fringe account tells of a manor lord who stationed a blindfolded watchman to sleepwalk through patrols, convinced that a dreaming sentinel would confuse ghosts. No official record confirms his madness, but the tale endures among village storytellers. Below, the yard lies deserted except for a lone shepherd dog circling the moonlit stables. You descend the narrow stair, the pikes but grazing the wall's crenellations, and slip through the sally port toward the cottages. Inside, a hush blankets the cottage rooms, broken only by the soft croon of a lullaby drifting through open windows. A mother hums an ancient tune, its melody simple, intervals wide, intended to coax her newborn into slumber so deep that nightmares dare not visit. Mainstream lullaby collections from the 14th century preserve versions of these songs, though lyrics vary by region. Historians still debate whether such melodies originated in Celtic monasteries or sprang organically from rural hearths. You pause by a window to listen. Sleep, my bairn, on mossy moss, may no fiend cross thy dreaming path, she croons, voice tender as moonlight on that hidden pond. The words twist folk belief and maternal love, blending protective charm with poetic hope. A fringe scholar suggests that fiend, in some variants, referred to restless spirits drawn to infant souls. Whether that was cautionary or purely metaphorical remains unresolved. Either way, the lullaby's gentle rise and fall feels like a balm for this vigilant heart. Continuing your circuit, you pass the granary, where a solitary lantern swings from a hook above heavy doors. You run a gloved finger over its rim and recall the coachman's lantern you carried across rutted roads, both flickering beacons against darkness, whether on high roads or cold stone corridors. Lifting the lantern slightly, you peer inside and spot a handful of oats spilled on the floor, proof that nocturnal rodents exploit every moment of guard inattentiveness. A brief chuckle escapes you as you imagine medieval grain stores declaring war on mice, and you kick at a loose grain, sending it skittering into shadow. Ahead, the manor chapel stands illuminated by dozens of votive candles, their flames forming a constellation across stained glass windows. You step inside, boots silent on flagstones cooled by evening air. The scent of burning tallow and beeswax warms your chest as you kneel before the carved oak reredos. Mainstream church inventories note that lay patrons often lit candles for departed kin or impending travel. Historians still argue whether such practices were acts of genuine piety or pragmatic attempts to manipulate spiritual favor. You find the ledger listing donors' names scratched into a pew's bench, a knight grateful for safe return from crusade, a widow requesting relief from grief, a merchant praying for bountiful harvest. Their words, once whispered here, hang in the quiet like invisible scrolls. Touching the wood, you feel centuries of hope and fear carved into grain, each petition a stitch in the tapestry of communal faith. Stepping back into the courtyard, you skirt the bakehouse door where embers still glow beneath yesterday's ashes. The baker's apprentice dozes on a sack of wheat, head pillowed on coarse burlap. You hesitate, wondering if snatching a handful of crust from his pocket would count as larceny. Instead, you pat his shoulder, reminding yourself that mercy tempered with humor kept medieval communities together. A fringe notice in a local chronicle claims that bakers' apprentices once held nocturnal bread raids, secret midnight feasts in the bakehouse loft. Historians remain skeptical, citing the risk of burns and discovery. Your final patrol leg leads you to the stables, where stacked hay mounds and bridled horses wait in stilled expectation. The groomsman, eyelids drooping, gives you a nod as you check each stall door for missing keys. A horse nickers softly as you pass, nostrils twitching at the scent of lantern smoke. Mainstream stable logs detail that night feeding occurred at midnight, with minimal disturbance so as not to spook the animals. Historians still argue whether the choice of midnight or cockcrow was optimum for herd health. Satisfied, you return the pike to its rack and sink onto a bench beneath a moonlit arch. The night's chill seeps through your breeches, but you welcome its sting, proof that you're awake, alert, alive. In the distance, church bells toll the hour, their sonorous peal cutting through shadows thicker than any wool cloak. As the watch nears its end, you unshoulder your satchel and retrieve a small flute carved from yew. You lift it to your lips and play a slow, hollow melody, no precise tune, just a drift of notes that echo across the cobblestones. Soldiers once hummed similar airs to steady trembling limbs before battle. Historians still debate whether such impromptu music lifted morale or simply marked time. Your song drifts into the night, mingling with the rhythmic breathing of sleeping cottages, the soft lowing of oxen, and the distant sigh of wind through the battlements. The melody fades, and the pike's shadow stretches long across the courtyard, pointing toward dawn's promise. You stand, stretch stiff limbs, and unhook the lantern one last time. Its light pools at your feet, illuminating the path back to your straw mattress. With a final glance at the silent manor, you whisper a vow to guard these stones again, tomorrow, and the night after that. Because in a world where darkness held more than pitch, vigilance and a soft lullaby were twin guardians of peace. The hush of night wraps you in a gentle embrace, each breath drawn slow and deep. The torches and lanterns dim in your mind, replaced by the soft glow of starlight and the steady flicker of memory. You no longer trudge through mud or strain to haul hay, but float on currents of stone-cold dew and candlelit whispers. Let your muscles relax, unwinding the day's knots as the pike finds rest in its rack and the horses doze in the straw. Feel the rhythm of lantern flames, steady, unwavering, patient, echo in your chest. Remember the lullaby's tender vow, its promise that no fiend will cross your dreaming path. Inhale the faint scent of lavender sachets and tallow wax, imagining their warmth dissolving every ache and worry. Your heartbeat slows, synchronized with the hush of oxen lowing in distant barns, the far-off drip of water from mossy stones, and the sighing breath of ancient oak trees. Tonight, let go of every worry, the chafing edges of pillory boards, the clatter of plowshares, even the glare of noble eyes at a clumsy bow. All fades now into soft shadow, where even imagined giants tiptoe and nightingales croon unseen. Allow your thoughts to drift like a lantern's glow across empty courtyards, settling finally on your straw mattress warmed by days of toil and nights of vigilant peace. Gently lower your gaze, feel your eyelids grow heavy, and let the whisper of medieval stones cradle you. You have wandered ramparts and forded rivers, woven through banquets and lullabies, and still you stand, safe, soothed, and serenely calm. Rest now, in the gentle hush of history's embrace, until dawn beckons with muddy dawn chores once more.